Welcome to the Canadian Race Relations Foundation's webinar titled Spotlight Activism Within Black Communities. My name is Chiamaka Morgo and I'm the Board Vice Chairperson of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Before we begin today's event, I want to let everyone know that simultaneous translation is available and can be accessed by clicking the globe icon for interpretation. It's found at the bottom right side of your Zoom window. As a board member representing Vancouver, I wish to acknowledge that the place that we all now call the city of Vancouver is situated on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for having cared for the lands and waters since time immemorial, and we at the CRRF look forward to continued and closer partnerships with the Indigenous communities of Vancouver. Today, we will hear a moderated discussion with representatives from 4 empowering organizations who will share with us reflections on community organizing within Black communities. By amplifying the work of these community groups, we hope to spotlight exceptional examples of Black-led activism in Canada. Before we get to those, however, I will turn the virtual mic to the Executive Director of CRRF, Mohammed Hashim, to share some words.
Thank you, Chiamaka. My name is Mohammed Hashim. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land in which I speak to you from, which is the city of Mississauga, and is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. In particular, I want to acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and Ojibwe peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's really great to be here and to celebrate Black History Month with you all. It's not only an opportunity to reflect on the countless contributions and accomplishments of Black Canadians, but it's also a time to reflect on the issues and struggles facing Black communities today, in which we at the Foundation are working hard, along with many other groups and organizations, to eradicate. These struggles center around anti-Black racism, which manifests in all sorts of harmful ways, including through discrimination and violence. The horrific killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer in 2020 was a key moment of collective realization of just how anti-Black racism can kill, and that moment has served as a lightning rod for social change. It was not the only moment. There have been many moments before that, and there are many moments after that that have spurred an impetus for this country to respond. And as Canadians, we have our own painful stories that are too many to enumerate, but which include cases as recent as 2 weeks ago with the killing of Letjor Toole, shot by the Calgary police, and Moses Arhime, killed by the police in Markham. Both deaths are now under investigation. Then there are the names of people we have been recalling now for some time. Regis Korchinski-Paquette, a 29-year-old Black woman suffering from mental illnesses, who fell from her balcony while Toronto police officials were present in her apartment. And Jermaine Carby, who was shot by a police officer in Ontario's Beale region. There are too many others to name. Furthermore, we know that the disproportionate incarceration of Black people in the nation's prison system and the diminished likelihood that they will access parole, as revealed in a new Global Mail investigation, and the disproportionate number of Black children who are apprehended through child services. We also know how anti-Black racism has led to different outcomes when it comes to health, workplace mobility, wages, and other social determinants of health and wellness. All this is tied to a history of anti-Blackness in this country that starts from before Confederation and which reverberates to this day. As we continue to mourn the lives lost as a result of racialized violence and the futures impacted, we must hold our moral obligation to combat the hatred and prejudice that racism presents. There's no way to erase or ignore the pain. Racial justice is not an afterthought or a nice to have. This is about human rights, and all our institutions are accountable to any and all breaches of those rights. As we continue to listen to Black communities and learn how we can show up in a way that goes beyond lip service, we have to move forward and focus on the wins and stories of hope and success as well. At the CRRF, as part of our Black History Month social media campaign, we featured 28 heroes from across the country who have sacrificed so much to make this country a better place, not just for Black communities, but for every one of us. People like Norbs Phillips, a poet, writer, and lawyer whose first novel, Harriet's Daughter, is widely used in Ontario's high school curriculum. Jennifer Hodge de Silva produced an acclaimed and influential body of work known as realist social issue documentary, known as a realist social issue documentary. Her highly regarded film, Home Feeling, a struggle for communities, widely taught in film studies programs through Canada. Please check out our social media pages for more profiles of heroes who embody Canadian Black excellence. And please follow our work and provide us with input on how we can continue to learn from Canada's diverse Black communities. Thank you for being here and for helping us elevate and strengthen efforts towards eliminating systemic barriers against all equity-seeking and equity-deserving communities. This will help ensure increased opportunities for better representation and fuller participation in all aspects of society. I join you looking forward to the upcoming discussion with representatives from several remarkable community organizations from across the country, working tirelessly towards the goal of racial justice. Back to you, Chiamaka.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now we'll get to our main event. Moderating today's conversation is Nura Yunus. Nura is an Eritrean Canadian Muslim woman born and raised in Toronto. Nura has worked with various grassroots and nonprofit organizations in program design and delivery, community development, and workshop facilitation. Her passion for anti-Black racism recently led her to create the No Nonsense Anti-Racism podcast, a resource for learning about racial injustice and white supremacy from a Canadian perspective. The podcast, like all of today's featured projects, was awarded a grant through the CRRF's 2021 Community Mobilization Fund. Over to you, Nura.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, Chiamaka. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to be moderating what promises to be an insightful conversation about how community organizations are working together to fight anti-Black racism. I am delighted to introduce you to today's panelists to explore the dynamics of this work. From Positive Change Toronto Initiative, we have with us Mohammed Hassan and Khadro Abdul. Mohammed is a City of Toronto Partnership and Accountability Circle member. He provides guidance and advice to the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit in planning policies and services that impact outcomes for Black Torontonians of African descent, as reflected in the Toronto Action Plan. Khadro graduated from University of Toronto with a major in criminology and a double minor in sociology and women's and gender studies. At the University of Toronto, Khadro focused her studies on the overrepresentation of minorities in the prison system and the anti-Black racism that exists in the educational system. She is currently working to help support the advancement of Somali youth. From Black Business and Professional Network, New Brunswick, we have with us Orlayton Onyebuoha, Orlayton holds a Master of Business Administration from the University of New Brunswick, St. John, and an Immigration Consulting Diploma from Ashton College in Vancouver, as well as a bachelor's degree from the University of Benin, Nigeria, her home country. Orlayton volunteers across platforms to give back and promote New Brunswick as a choice province for international students to study in and for immigrants to live in. From Quebec-based Hoodstock, we have with us Cassandra Exume. Cassandra is a young woman with a passion for justice, liberation, and collective freedom. Having spent about 10 years in the field of marketing, she is now redirecting her path towards the causes that motivate her by working in the field of activism and community in Montreal. Hoodstock is the ideal space for her to lead projects that bring about change in a society struggling with systemic inequalities. Also from Quebec, we have with us Marcel Partouche Gutierrez from Prévention CDN Notre-Dame de Grâce. Marcel is a McGill researcher, co-researcher at École Nationale d'Administration Publique, community liaison with the Polar McGill University Research Center. She's also an artist, an administrator, and co-organizer of the Rap Battles for Social Justice and co-founder of Lotus Collective. Her artist name is Masauda. Her practice is heavily informed by her work as a community organizer and former youth from CARE. Thank you to everyone for being here. Let's begin our conversation. So first, we're going to start with Mohammed and Khadro. Your project, Speak Out, Addressing Structural Racism, is a documentary highlighting Somali youth stories on their experiences of racism. In this first round of question, let's go with Khadro. Why was it important to capture these stories?
So Mohammed and I were thinking of the best way to express the way that youth felt when they were in the real world. There are countless stories that Mohammed and I shared and heard from youth experiencing structural racism. We know in countless studies have shown that depth of anti-Black racism and Islamophobia in the Canadian educational system and how these practices contribute to the low achievement and high dropout rates of the Black youth, specifically Somali Canadian youth. There are workshops that we have organized for youth to discuss their personal experiences, but this time we want to share their lived experiences in a film. However, let me tell you, it wasn't easy finding people who want to share their experiences, but it wasn't about them not wanting to do it. It was more about that they didn't have a platform where they could share these stories. They didn't have a place that was comfortable where they could share these stories as well. We made sure we provided the youth information about what was happening and explained to them clearly how they would be filmed. An important reason why we highlighted these stories is to uplift Somali youth by giving them a space to narrate their own stories and struggles, supporting them to create spaces where they feel seen, heard, and valued, and showing them that their lived experiences and perspectives are important in addressing and eliminating the anti-Black racism that has been embedded in these systems. Oftentimes, youth voices are absent from meetings and discussions, and they also do not share their stories with anyone. These stories are almost stored for another person to experience the same situation. Therefore, we want to avoid this for future generations. Another reason why we captured these stories is because we wanted this to be our way as an organization to document these lived experiences and work to improve the lives of youth. We thought about our short-term and our long-term goals for this film. Our short-term goal was to voice youth experiences, and the long-term would be to change the issues that youth have shared in these documentaries. Positive Change Toronto Initiative will work to overcome these barriers that has affected the youth population. Thank you.
Thank you, Khadro. That sounds amazing. We have a short clip of the film, actually, to get people excited for when it officially launches later this spring.
My name is Rabrel Dini. I'm a third-year university student. I go to York. I'm studying human rights and equity studies. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
You were once told to aim low. Who said this to you, and how did that make you feel at the time?
This happened in the 10th grade math class. I was in my class, and there's a supply teacher that came instead of my teacher, and he basically told me that when he was asking about everybody is like career paths and where they want to be in like 5 years or 10 years. And he was asking everybody, and people were saying like doctors, they're talking about lawyers, they're talking about engineers. And he was like, when he came to me and I said, I want to be either a lawyer or I want to work in the human rights field, he told me, oh, like I see you working at like McDonald's for the rest of your life or something along those lines. And I was like, I'm just like a high school student, right? I haven't even figured out my life yet. And you met me 20 minutes ago. How would you be able to come up with that, that type of like, you know, conclusion about me without even knowing me or knowing anything about me?
Right.
Yeah.
How did this make you feel afterwards, especially around your peers?
It kind of made me feel embarrassed. It made me feel signaled out. It kind of made me feel alone because like nobody else had that experience except for me. And he did not come to the conclusion about anybody else like that. So I was kind of like confused as to why like it was me. But after looking at everybody, it kind of like became clear.
That looks to be a really promising documentary. Well done. My next question is for Olartan. Your project affirmed the importance of networking events in fostering a space to facilitate immigrant integration into professional and entrepreneurial fields. Can you tell us what was the impact of this workshop?
Thank you so much, and hello everyone once again. So in business, we realized that even in profession, having a circle of influence matters a lot, and it helps you also to really, strengthen yourself in the area where you're having issues fitting in. And from experience, it is obvious that we immigrants, we actually come through some phase in our career where we find it a bit difficult to adapt. And the same thing applies also for businesses, right? Where you really need to learn the culture ground up. You don't also want to lose your identity, right? And it's pretty much challenging, especially when you find yourself in that category of, an immigrant, a struggling immigrant, a Black, so to say. So that was why the idea of Black Business and Professional Network came up. And that led us to the first inaugural event where we needed to talk to professionals in all spheres of New Brunswick to understand what they were struggling with. Prior to the event, we sent a survey out. Just for a background, the Black Business and Professional Network New Brunswick is an organization that actually caters to assist Black immigrants that are struggling to find a network, to find a space where they can share their vulnerability without being judged. So we literally had to send out a survey, to understand what they're struggling with. Because, you cannot give what you don't have. We needed to understand what they are looking forward to achieve. And based on that responses, we're able to tailor the offering. We're able to kind of have people from different settings, organizations, and even business ecosystem to come around and share the ideas of what their experiences were when they started out in this province and going forward. So by the time that seminar was over, we had over 50 persons, join us from different industry, from different community. And the feedback was very, very amazing, because there are some things that some of them never thought of, because the idea of, bringing your authentic self were really discussed. The lead panel, the lead facilitator actually is a John Maxwell coach that literally took us through the disc transformation seminar, and people were able to understand their styles, and they learned how they can adapt their style, to fit into a certain work environment without losing their identity. Because again, sometimes you don't have to lose your identity in order to conform to work situation. So those were the key lessons from this seminar. And from the feedback we received on the spot, it was amazing that people, we realized that over 100% people felt that they were not really doing much networking, and some of them also wanted to explore more areas where they could network, and how they could also network across culture. So it's pretty much around how you can network and still retain your cultural identity.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Marcel, over to you. You were involved in an art mural honoring Nicholas Gibbs from Montreal's Notre-Dame-de-Grâce neighborhood. He was shot and killed by police. The audience can see from the pictures how impactful the mural was. And I think we'll show some of those photos now.
Yes.
Sorry. How were the mural and related workshops that were held with young Black and racialized people in the neighborhood received? And how has that experience informed community organizing there?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that it's an honor to be sharing space among such leaders in Canada. So thank you for that. And this really came out from the community. We did a community roundtable that took place in July 6, 2020 at Maison d'Haïti. We established together a community process to put together the mural that would commemorate Anthony Griffin and Nicholas Gibbs. But we actually did exchange with Anthony Griffin's family, who wished to actually have a scholarship named after him and not a mural. Nicholas Gibbs and Anthony Griffin were both murdered, brutally shot by the SPVM 30 years apart in the same neighborhood of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce and DG. So there was about 21 organizations trickling in and out that participated in the vision of the mural. And the goal was also to eventually make it into a series. For instance, Hoodstock, we have Cassandra that's here representing Hoodstock, who have been fighting to have a mural for about over 10 years now for Freddy Villanueva. So I'd like to say first and foremost that this was not Prévention DG really took a role in coordinating through the rap battles for social justice, the event, but it really comes from a lineage of activism and just social justice fights for many decades before we inherited them. So you can see in the pictures that there's a family that is there. We also consulted the family at all times, shared the vision, the ideas of having the sky actually came from Irma, who is Nicholas Gibbs' mother, and we also tailored the whole event based on what we wanted Nicholas Gibbs to be remembered as, and honor his life, and also his children's life. So that was the impact. I think is yet to be fully measured, and I think it's a very hard thing to actually be able to measure. And it's more of an overall movement that we're trying to create. But I'd say that although Nicholas Gibbs' murderer, the people who shot him were not convicted, it still fueled a sense of sustainability. We're still trying to see how we can support the family as a community. And although that we built a certain distrust towards the institutions that are held responsible for justice in this case, we built a better net as a community. The trust and the safety that is present in the communities that were present are kind of making up for the lack of presence that the institutions have shown.
Thank you for sharing. It was really beautifully said. Thank you. So we're going to jump over to Cassandra now. Cassandra, your project, Anti-Racism Coalition in the School System, really speaks to the need of ensuring learning materials are updated to raise awareness around cultural diversity, the history of racism, and the fight against anti-Black racism. Can you speak to the prevalence of systemic racism within educational institutions and how you hope programs like yours can eventually fight against this?
Absolutely. Just really thank you for having me and be with such a great panel. It's truly an honor. Well, for us, we call this project CARE because we're really putting care into the youth. And there's so many different layers that our kids are going through every day in terms of racism. I know Hoodstock was truly involved in the demo that we did after the death of George Floyd, and even before that, since the murder of Freddy Villanueva, we've been really active in the Montreal North community and, in Montreal in general. But what we realized is the impact in racism at school for the kids. We're also really privileged to be close to in high school in our offices, and 2 young girls came to our offices and just told us that their teachers were, putting the N-word any time of the day, and they were just going through so much. So we really see that when parents are sending their kids to school, they're not, Black and brown parents, they're not equipped to fight and just to have that leadership. When a teacher, and I know the first video that we saw really reflect that, when a teacher comes to you or anybody comes to you and tell you that you have no future in terms of the career that you want to have, the trauma is huge for the whole community. So for us, we really want to do like a coalition with teachers, with kids, with different mentors to make sure that we have that empowerment within the school and the students are equipped to speak up and to know their rights and they know how beautiful their history is. So we have different phases. We want to do exposition, art therapy. We want to do different mentoring program. We want to do games also because kids love to play and have fun, but all in education. Désolée, la modèle d'éducation. Je crois que je vais aller vers le français. Thank you. So yeah, that's so important for us. A thing that is really hard to believe is that in school in Montreal North, most of the teachers are actually white. So there's a lack of representation. And I remember one day I came to our school and we were giving out masks. Hoodstock really helped during the pandemic from 2020 to today. And I had braids and a little girl was like, oh my God, you have braids just like me. You look like me. And just the fact that she was able to see a Black woman in front of her, she was like, I can be in front of students one day. It is possible. So CARE is all about that, making sure that Black and brown kids know how beautiful they are, know that they have the same opportunities of the people that are here. And we want to make sure with mentors that they know their history and they're going to fight for their freedom every day. And I think for us, it's a beautiful thing for kids to teach their own parents how beautiful they are. You know, I don't know how you guys were raised, but, you know, we never talk about racism in my family or slavery. We just kind of went and do our things. But to make sure that kids and young people from high school go back to their home and at Christmas, they are the ones who are talking about change and making sure that their parents know actually that maybe in their own workplaces, they can do a difference. That's really what we want to do with that project.
That sounds great. Thank you. Yes, the representation and the history, also important. Thank you for sharing that. Mohammed, over to you now. We saw a clip of the film that you will be sharing soon. What can you share with us? How else is your organization working to ensure a future that is free of racism for Somali youth?
Thank you, Nura. I think one sad reality that is there is always be a people who are resistant towards other human beings. However, no human is more human than another human beings. Our organization, Positive Change Toronto Initiative, campaigns for tackling the root causes of the gun violence in the community, while also addressing systemic change in the education, criminal justice system, health, and employment sector. So one of the ways that we fight racism is through empowering the youth. We provide programs that build the capacity of the Somali youth in order to establish youth leaders who are deeply committed to systemic change that can assist other youth in connecting their stories, such as family dynamics, inequality, gun violence in the community, poverty, to the broader context, which includes unjust police system, racism in the education system that targets vulnerable young Somali people. So we provide them the tools necessary to fight for their vision of justice and articulate a clear set of demands for systemic change. One of the things that we have developed was a youth-led advocacy toolkit on how to navigate the Canadian criminal justice system. It's the first of its kind, where we touch important topics such as know your rights, interacting with the police, navigating the court system, custody, and reintegration into the community. Another thing that we also provide is workshops that challenge racial stereotypes by incorporating Afrocentric values or Somalinim as known as Somaliness, and also promoting critical media literacy. You may know how the Canadian media portrays Somali youth when some incident happened by saying words like, oh, he was known to the police, or specifically saying Somali guy did this, while taking away the Canadians. Someone who was born in Toronto, never seen Somalia, they were saying Somali boy. So this kind of racism is deeply rooted and it's against Somali people. So we advocate for fair media coverage that works toward healing the wounds of Somali youth who have been impacted by anti-Black racism. Positive Change Toronto Initiative, we also provide our youth with opportunities to investigate, dismantle, and rewrite the damaging narratives that mainstream media use to construct and oppress Somali youth. We have also been engaging with the Muslim inmates in Toronto East and South Detention Center through our chaplain volunteer program, where mainly this engagement has been in the forms of providing spiritual support, religious concern and services, and preparing traditional Somali treats and providing beverages during the Eid celebrations. As a Positive Change, we also make space for the Somali youth to examine the ways in which social structures privilege and oppress particular communities, and the ways in which our community can collectively resist inequality in transformative ways. We mainly focus on integrating social justice activities, discussions, and trainings and storytelling into the foundation of the youth programming. Thank you, Nura.
Thank you, Mohammed. I love what you said about no human is more human than another person. I think that's an important lesson for all of us. And I also love this thread that I'm hearing when everyone's speaking about fighting systemic racism, and you're all doing it in such interesting and different ways, whether it's in the education system, whether it's in criminal justice, through the media, and in business. So love the conversation so far. Olartin, what have you learned about the power of community organizing to help advance professional attainment within Black communities?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. One thing for sure that is at the center of our philosophy is what we call RISE. So when you're thinking of the typical rice that you eat, we have it as an acronym of our values, which is respect. We treat everyone with dignity and respect. So no race, either Black, white, or mixed, is superior to the other one. And we also have innovation at the center of how we operate, which leads us to educating our people and the Black community, as well as also the community of people that don't look like us. Then caring, we're people oriented, and we also strive for excellence. So how do we organize to come together? We all know that over the years, the Black race has suffered a lot of, a bit of discrimination at every stage. Now, we don't even want to talk about the history of slavery anymore. We want to start talking about what the Black brings to the table, our contribution, our impact, the things we have done that people are not talking about. And that's where we see ourselves as a learning organization, an organization that actually puts in a whole lot of resources, human power, to ensure that we research all those history of the Black achievements, the Black contribution. During the process of our first inaugural event, we're able to work with the Black History Society that is actually being led by Ralph Thomas, who happens to be a custodian of the Black history in New Brunswick. And we realized so many things that people never talked about, like the Ice Lady. The Ice Lady is a woman that actually led, that took over a project that nobody wants to talk about today. And she kind of led the team of men, and she turned the business around. She was even featured in a magazine in Boston, Massachusetts. And these are the things we want to see. We want to see the persona of those Blacks in those days, in the time where people never even believed in them, but they persevered, they succeeded. Those are the things we want to showcase, and that's what we're trying to do now. Because we also have the forthcoming generation. We really want to catch them young before we lose them. We want them to be a youth that will grow up knowing their identity, knowing what they're capable of doing. And that's why we see ourselves as that learning hub that respects everyone. We're not going to throw any ideas away. Nobody is going to be left behind. So those are the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to innovate, using the RCA, root cause analysis, to understand what has happened in the past. What did they do wrong? What can be done better? So that's why we're evolving, and we've tried to the first stage of what we're doing right now in New Brunswick as Black is to honor those Black people that are there. For instance, there's another Black in our community here that actually is that was one of those that helped, I think, the province of New Brunswick on a particular case on a particular case where they had a forensic analysis some years ago. Nobody is talking about that person. So those are the people we want to showcase. We want to spotlight them, and we're also having some youth that are in entrepreneurship that nobody is talking about. We have a girl called Sisinimi. She's a student right now in Ontario, but she has a business here, a business that actually addresses the needs of Black immigrants when it comes to food, because again, sometimes food is a basic necessity of life. When we came in here, we're struggling to get it. And people like that discover that this is something they could do at a very young age. We want to nurture them. We want to recognize their impact. So those are the things we're doing on the community grassroots level. It's a long journey, but it's always good you start somewhere. And that somewhere is what we started now. and we hope to continue to, go in that trajectory. And one more thing I also like to talk about is, so many in this community where we find ourselves, we realize that as a professional, because I've talked more of business, as a professional, there is a certain level at which we do not have Black representation in, pretty much senior to high level management. We feel like that ceiling, that glass ceiling can be shattered if we come together to understand and to discover those talents that are fit for such role, and we can now encourage and push and recommend such people to, to be recommended or to even be assigned to such position or to be recruited by way of job referrals, mentorship, and all that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm totally with you. Let's talk about Black excellence. Let's talk about Black achievements. I'm with you all the way. And I've never heard of the Ice Lady, which is a shame. I've been born and raised in Toronto, in Canada, and I've never heard of her. So would love to learn more about that. Okay. Marcel, I'm going to come over to you next. How has your work provided insights into addressing systemic racism within Black and racialized communities?
I'm going to try to be concise in my answer because I think it's a layered issue. First and foremost, I think the community consultation that brought 21 community organizations allowed us to kind of do a summary of what had been done. This particular project, we used art to inform policy. We actually used hip hop to inform policy. We had 6 policy recommendations, and but there has been probably 30 documents such as this one that have been produced by Black community leaders in the past. So it was not about necessarily repeating ourselves, but focusing our energy and realizing where systemic racism was most prevalent and how we could tackle it as a united front. So on one hand, it seems that there's a monster that's bigger than us to tackle, because until very recently, systemic racism was not actually acknowledged as an issue in Quebec. That makes it already really hard, because if we're not able to name the violence, how can we fix it? So already that allowed us to be able to speak on anti-Blackness, on racial profiling, on police brutality very openly, and not negotiate the terminology to make sure that it fits within the political correctness of the current government, made us stronger. And because that was very clear from the get-go. And then on the other hand, the workshops that we provided to youth allowed us to see what was the actual progress, where I think youth are the best informants in terms of what are the failures, but also what are the victories of society. Where are we at? What are we really focusing on? Because for most youth, the color of your skin shouldn't determine whether or not you're going to live. It's not a life sentence. This is not even a question. So to know that we're growing in a community and in generations that want to fight the same fight and are already so past this these issues, not to say other words, was really encouraging and engaging. And I'm again super grateful to Head and Hands, which is a community organization that works for over 50 years, focusing on mental health, on also Black mental health. And that really brought such a huge support to the family. But at the same time, it showed that if we didn't have community organizations that would make up for the lack of accountability of the government, then there would be no sense of support. So the systemic racism is still overbearingly suffocating. And I think we used very precise tools. The model that we used was actually used at l'École nationale d'administration publique, which is pretty much the government's university. So we did our homework. There's Bashra Manai, who is the commissionary to fight racism in Montreal, and 38 recommendations were provided to the general public after an open consultation that the City of Montreal committed to actually apply. We used those recommendations, connected them to the reality of NDG, of Nicholas Gibbs' story, of our community stories to make ourselves impossible to be silenced, but that still doesn't seem to be enough. So even when we use the master's tools, it doesn't seem to come exactly to where we want. But I'd like to say that, again, it's really, to me, the community work and the community support that prevailed where institution didn't, and systemic racism still feels like it's a heavy burden to try to get rid of, but that together we're step by step making our stories heard and fighting for justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It can be so overwhelming. Systemic racism has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and it is not something that we're going to necessarily be able to get rid of entirely in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. This is really like generational work. So you bring up such an important point about the power of community to help us get through these really tough times and tough moments. So really happy and glad to hear that you have that community in Quebec and in Montreal. Cassandra, last but not least, I have a question for you next. How hopeful are you that community organizing will help advance racial equity and justice in Black communities?
Listen, to be honest, someday I'm really hopeful, someday I'm not. It's normal. I think it's a long journey. Personally, I'm Haitian. So for me, historically, we did a big revolution in terms of the Black communities in the world. So for me, that's a great, I always think about that revolution all the time, every time that I'm sad and I'm less hopeful. But Hoodstock was born because of community. You know, Hoodstock is about the hood, is knowing that by us, you know, for us, by us, that's how we're going to truly liberate our communities. And I truly believe that in my core. The passion that we have, the long hours that we're doing, how fast we can actually make projects. When I hear all of you guys, I'm so like in awe of the work, but that's only because we don't have that more like a lot of, it's not that hard for us to do something because of the passion of the community. When I go back to March 2020 and how COVID really truly hit Montreal North, Marcel was actually one of our volunteers, and just by a day, we contacted a bunch of volunteers, we collected money, we collected masks, and that's how Hoodstock really got a big and national recognition, because we're actually doing what our government was supposed to do, which is making sure that the community were aware of the pandemic and the measures that were needs to be, you know, respected, and how fast we're able to do it. I'm always so impressed that the community and people can truly make changes just because we're so fearless also to talk about systemic racism before it's respected by our government. It's huge. It really truly takes courage, and to have people like that, like all of you guys around us, make for me a lot of things easier. We don't have to convince people, and we're actually using our pains and changing to a purpose. And that's beautiful. We still need to go to therapy as well, but that truly makes for me a difference, because all that energy that, you know, instead of doing bad things, we're like, okay, let's change it and make sure to change the narrative of the next person next to me, or my kids, or my parents. And that's the only way for me that we're going to truly liberate the Black communities, by getting together, getting along, and using our pain and changing to a beautiful purpose, and making sure that the future will be really great for our kids and everybody else affected by systemic racism.
That was really powerful. Thank you. I think that it's almost the theme for this entire panel as well, for us, by us, because you are all very inspiring change makers in your communities, doing work that is so important and so impactful. And I know it can feel really difficult in the moment. As you said, Cassandra, I think we all need therapy. Big proponent of therapy. I think we should all definitely get it as much as possible. But yeah, this change takes time and it takes work, but every single one of you are contributing to that change in Canada. So kudos to every single one of you. And that's it for our panel today. But thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And a big thank you from the Black and racialized communities that you represent and advocate for. Back to you, Chiamaka.
Thank you, Nura, for moderating that very insightful session. Lots of amazing nuggets from all the speakers, and we really heard about how community organizing and education are huge elements of the work that Black communities have done over time and in present to push for social justice and in healing, and certainly even for Black excellence. And it's really just amazing to see the different versatile ways that all these speakers have used to push for these things in their own communities within Canada. So it's on that note, and before closing, that I'd like to take a few minutes to speak about the CRRF's commitment towards financially supporting community initiatives like the ones that we just heard about. Currently, the CRRF has funding available for events, including youth initiative sponsorship through the National Anti-Racism Fund. Each funding stream has a different criteria and different amounts of available funding. So if you're interested to learn more, please check out our website, www.crrf-fcrr.ca for more information. Please sign up to receive our regular newsletters to remain updated about our events and our programs. In the meantime, please do take a few minutes to fill out a short survey, which you'll be receiving, so that we can hear your thoughts on today's program. Thank you all for attending this event. I hope you learned something new and found the discussions inspiring. Have a wonderful rest of your day.